Yeah, so Janice and Laura, thinking about this as the muscle building of when I've jumped to a conclusion or I'm leaning into a belief, the workout of the week is how do I get more limber? How do I get stronger in the companion reaction of asking or testing that thinking?
What if building leadership and connection skills in real life was less about grand epiphanies and more about small, consistent reps? The way athletes train, the way musicians practice, the way simulation refines teaming and clinical performance. Push ups, sit ups, building up your cardio. We put challenges and weights in front of ourselves to get fit. We embrace no pain, no gain. Yet when we find something difficult in real life, especially an interpersonal something, we often skitter away. We put down the weight and walk away from the workout. Curious Now helps us lean into those everyday interactions, the awkward silences, simmering tensions, and high stakes conversations, and treat them like reps in a leadership gym. Curious Now, stronger later.
So, welcome back to Curious Now from the Center for Medical Simulation. This week, we've got one of our listener episodes, and I'll be talking with my colleagues Janice Palaganas and Laura Rock about their experiences with the workouts of the week. Janice Palaganas is the founding director of the Center for Excellence in Healthcare Simulation Research at the Massachusetts General Hospital Institute for Health Professions. And since that's not enough, and there's never enough for Janice, she's also the principal investigator of what's called the Rebel Lab, which definitely wins the award for the best moniker or mnemonic in a name. And Rebel in this case stands for doing research on the cognitive neuroscience of simulation-based learning, cognitive neuroscience of feedback. When you're not running those two organizations within MGH IHP, you're also a professor of health professions education at MGH IHP. So welcome, Janice.
Thanks, Jenny. Thanks for having me.
And Laura Rock is an intensivist and pulmonologist at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center and an assistant professor of medicine at Harvard Medical School. Laura, I know you most, though, through your work in communication training with residents and faculty across our Harvard system as the director of communication for the ICU there. So I'm very thrilled to have you here. Welcome.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
And let me remind our listeners that occasionally you'll hear the voice of our producer, James Lipshaw, from time to time. And James, glad you're here.
Glad to be here.
So, ladies, today we're going to start with episode 11 of Curious Now, which was all about learning not only to bystand what we're thinking, but to take a sort of skeptical view of it and not believe everything you think. I don't know if you ever saw that bumper sticker, but I remember I was driving along once and it said, "Don't believe everything you think." That's what this episode is about. So the workout of the week this week was to recognize those moments when you have a strong thought about something or you've drawn a conclusion, but you kind of slam the brakes or you gently tap the brakes and you're like, maybe I'm missing something. So this week's workout of the week was a kind of mental rehearsal to practice getting used to questioning our own thinking. And I don't know about you, but when I'm right, it's really hard for me to tap the brakes and wonder what I could be missing. So I wonder what it was like for you guys.
This is such a powerful move when it happens. And I feel like despite working in and really even being drawn to medicine for complex conversations, this is really hard to do. And I feel like we try to teach, um, judge other people by their intentions and try to like judge myself by my actual impact. But when we have a mismatch and we think we're right, and we realize in retrospect that we're really wrong, and we could have really benefited from just having some uncertainty about our rightness, it really is such a powerful move.
Laura, I'm just wondering, I can imagine that you have the opportunity to um, experience some humility about this multiple times a week when you're on service in the ICU. Wondering if you have any kind of recent struggles with this or story about this that you could share.
Yeah, well, actually, I do get to practice this multiple times a week and have humility about it multiple times a week, even more at home with my two teenage boys. and, and I was just thinking about this recent example where my older son got into a car accident, and he called me panicked. And, it was his first accident. He's a fairly new driver, and he really didn't know what to do. And I immediately assumed it was his fault. And, and even if it wasn't his fault, like, assumed that he had some role in this incident happening. And I mean, unfortunately, at the end of the day, I think my son does overall judge me by my intentions, but in that moment, wow, like, I really had it wrong. Like, he was hit from behind by a driver who, when he was stopped at a legitimate stop, and it was completely not his fault. And my immediate reaction was just so unhelpful, and just so kind of supportive and unkind to him when he, I didn't share my reaction with him. I was actually, like, helping him with the collision situation. But, when we got to talk about it, I made a lot of assumptions and did not have nearly enough curiosity. And if I had just said, "Hey, tell me what happened," you know, I would have come to I would have approached it very differently.
So this seems so normal, Laura. As you were telling this story, I was imagining you sort of like leaning forward if you were on the phone with him, or um, or metaphorically, when somebody does something and you've decided the reason already, you're almost like leaning forward. Um, what propelled that? Because, I know you to be generally a pretty supportive mom. And so it seems a little out of character for you to jump to that conclusion. And so I'm kind of curious about, what do you think was going on for you?
Uh, You know, I really think that I I don't know. I mean, it's so interesting. Like, I think that I um feel such ownership of my kids doing something wrong, or it's such an identity thing that, like, and my older son is what we call a spirited child. I mean, he's a little bit wild, and I just kind of assume that he brings his charisma, which he has a lot of, to any human encounter, including driving. He's actually a really good driver, and really safe, and but I feel like I just take so much ownership over, like, them doing something wrong, or I don't know, it just seems really pathologic. But um I just, in my head, didn't give him the immediate benefit of the doubt. Maybe because he's a teenager, and we all have these stereotypes about teen drivers, and he was in a rush, and so it was just natural for me to assume that he did something, and maybe didn't have that much experience driving in the city. So,
Yeah.
I mean, we could spend the entire hour just unpacking why why I don't give my kid the benefit of the doubt. That would be really productive for me. But I think it's
Yeah.
a fairly common mistake that can be, pretty hurtful to a relationship. But fortunately, I can also, you know, I can also come back to him with an apology and a sort of, can we do that over? Because I think I really screwed up in some of the assumptions I was making. And he's pretty generous when I do that.
Yeah. So Janice and Laura, thinking about this as the muscle building of when I've jumped to a conclusion or I'm leaning into a belief, the workout of the week is how do I get more limber? How do I get stronger in the companion reaction of asking or testing that thinking? And Janice, I know, as a parent of, well, now 20 somethings or teenager plus 20 somethings, I'm sure you can relate to this, but as a CrossFit trainer, also, any thoughts on kind of the counter
Yeah.
intuitive aspect of this, like building our muscles in this space?
Jenny, I think this is the most difficult skill. And I think it's the most difficult for a number of reasons, but the one I struggle with right now as I have been practicing this is the weeding through the emotions to actually pause and ask yourself what could be missing.
Wrapping up this light touch on the workout of the week of imagining what could I be missing. I think of that workout really essentially as a mental rehearsal that could be done potentially in advance. But Laura's story of her kid's car crash highlights that, when we need it the most is when we're least likely to be able to do it. Laura, it looks like you have a thought there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I was thinking that I feel like with my kids, it's harder for me to do it, but at work, maybe because I have a patient's life on the line, I think I'm better at getting input, even if I think I'm right. So, like if I think a patient's ready to be extubated and I want to extubate them, but I'm new on service and the respiratory therapist says, no, I really think we need to just switch to a controlled mode. This isn't the day, and we can talk about the data. I'm much more likely to think, huh, this respiratory therapist probably knows something I don't. Or this nurse has been with this patient for 3 days and I'm just coming on service. So I feel like, when a patient is um, at risk, I'm probably more likely to think what, if the team isn't on board, like what don't I know? I'm not going to ram through my plan without checking in with the team. So
What's the difference emotionally, Laura? I'm wondering. In the first story, I can imagine that your like emotions are more, you're more embodied, like your emotions have you a bit more. Whereas even in the second situation, even though in a way it's more life threatening for someone, not you, um, it's cooler. Is that accurate?
I think that's probably accurate. I also think I'm just so conscious of how much I depend on the perspectives of the interprofessional team when I'm working. And maybe I don't respect that I really need the perspectives of the, you know, different roles in the family when I'm dealing with a family issue. And I probably should because, my everyone in the family has an important perspective. And if I don't know what it is and I'm making assumptions, then I'm really missing something important. So it's such an interesting dilemma to think about, like, why am I handling the what could I be missing better in one environment than in another, and why, and unpacking for myself what makes me more successful at this in one environment as opposed to another.
So maybe we'll leave it there with this workout of the week of asking ourselves what I could be missing with the insight um, from both Laura and Janice, your earlier question of context, that maybe the practice for us is not only asking, what could I be missing, but noticing when that's harder to ask and when that's easier to ask, and what can we learn about ourselves and our interactions in that process. So we've been talking with Laura Rock and Janice Palaganas about our episode entitled You Might Be Right, You Might Be Crazy, in which we look at the fact that we tend to forget to wonder what we could be missing when we're thinking something with great certainty. And I'd like to end with the idea that Laura and Janice, I think, helped us surface here, which is it's not only the muscle of asking myself, what could I be missing, but starting the process of sort of bystanding. When can I ask that? And when is it really hard for me to ask that? And learning about myself in the process. This has been Curious Now from the Center for Medical Simulation. Thanks for listening with us.